This is the benefit of all the members who are present here. Vasu has got more than 2 decades of experience in WFM. He comes from engineering background and MBA from IGNO and EMP from uh, IIM Bangalore. Vasu has been a veteran in delivery, software services delivery, and played a role of delivery head in multiple verticals. And Vasu has been playing a vital role in few of the companies, especially now in autos. Uh, great to know about Vasu. And Vasu brings in different perspective altogether as far as people supply chain management and WFM is concerned. So with this, we're going to have a very exciting session on the WFM trends and organization changes, which is something that is very unique for all the WFM professionals to know. With this, I hand over control to Vasu. Yeah.
Thank you, Shiva. How do I share my screen? Let me see.
I'll just give you the access 1 minute.
Okay, all right. So first of all, good afternoon, everyone. Had this been an in-person conference or a summit, probably half of you would be, enjoying your lunch. And but now with this whole scenario of work from home and summit from home, please enjoy your lunch if you need to, while I go through some of the WFM trends and discuss organizational challenges and changes that we need to. I was actually thinking about putting together some content, just a couple of slides, just to kind of walk through the whole thought process that I had. And while thinking about it, I thought, I was just playing around with the PowerPoint design schemes. And this scheme, the bubble scheme, really hit me hard. We all realize we actually, the bubble just burst, right? So much of our myths, so much of our preconceived notions about how workforce should actually, get to work, just got busted, right? And here we are in a midst of transformation. As I mentioned in one of the previous panel discussions, we're in the middle of acceleration. And so the topic that I took is some of the trends that we are experiencing in WFM, and what do organizations face in terms of challenges, right? Is it mindset? Is it something else? Is it the employee himself or herself? Or is it the structures that we have in place? So I'll kind of briefly dwell on it. I'll probably take about 15 minutes, and we can kind of then we can probably spend and take few questions. I'm hearing some background noise, not sure, so if would appreciate if folks can go on mute. Thank you. So let's look at the change dimensions, right? What's changing? I think we have had some fantastic discussions, passionate speaking in the panel discussions. We've had some excellent insights in the previous, keynote addresses. So the change dimensions that I'm going to talk about also dwells with many of the points that have already been mentioned. I will try to kind of put a different perspective to it. And I'll probably take a lot has been talked about, the contact centers. A lot has been, shared in terms of, the BPO processes. I'll probably take an example of the IT development, life cycle itself, IT processes itself, and what the IT industry is going through itself, right? The dimensions that are hitting us, that are at play, as we see now, we almost have 4 to 5 generations of workforce, right, at the same time. Now we were talking of millennials, but guess what? We'll have the Gen Z becoming a majority part of the workforce very soon, right? So therefore, while a lot has been debated, discussed about how the generations differ in terms of the whole behavioral aspect of sharing, communicating, learning, right? How we differ as generations. I think what we also need to acknowledge is that eventually, right, the commonalities also do exist, right? for the generations, different generations to come to work and kind of really work together. Right? Eventually, what every individual seeks is quality of work and the quality of output that he or she delivers. Right? So that hasn't changed. It's just that the expression of that has changed, through the generations. The other dimension that we all have to really look at is what really motivates people, right? Workforce management groups, the HR teams have really looked at this, as a point in time motivation for many years, right? Well, you do this and we will probably give you incentive, right? You do this well, your metrics should look good and you will get a bonus, right? You get additional bonus. Over the time, this motivation itself has become a subject of what really motivates an employee. So that whole subject has got, the methods have got enhanced, and now we have talk about how we enable employees to learn better, right? That's a great motivation. How the workforce group enable people to kind of change roles, maybe change projects, right? Perform and do different things within an organization. Too often than not, right? We have seen employees spend years together, right? And the whole question of loyalty, right? And probably they've spent their years in the same project, in the same engagement, probably becoming an SME on this, to their credit. But then at the end of the day, would they stay motivated to the same levels is a big question mark. And for teams like workforce groups and the HR teams, the question is, how do we define growth for such individuals, right? It has really fascinated, functions like ours. So that's the behavioral part. So a lot is changing on this dimension, right? The second part is, we've been discussing since morning how the workplace is becoming irrelevant, slowly fading away, right? It doesn't matter, where we work from. In fact, one of the previous panel discussions, we talked about what will society think about it, right? Because a lot of us in many of the geographies take pride in the fact that I am going to work, right? But guess what? The world is all set to change. Eventually, people will be worried and more concerned about what we do and classify what we really do as work rather than going to a place getting defined as work, right? So that's the thing that's changing. And similarly, it's going to open up a whole new set of opportunities for individuals who probably got left out in terms of expressing themselves, expressing their talents, right? Talent anywhere, anytime, right? Housewife, they should be able to really get back to work. We have seen so many cases where people coming back to work after a long leave, maybe a sabbatical, really finding it tough to adjust to the workforce environment, right? So such professionals, would have a great opportunity ahead, where talent anywhere, anytime, if it's mobilized, people will be able to express themselves better and perhaps find fulfilling ways of meeting their aspirations. Flexibility is going to be the preference, right? I think we talked about how not only work from home is becoming the new reality, but flexibility is going to be a critical component of how organizations need to organize themselves and provide employee that leverage of being able to contribute. And the focus has to be on output instead of the process of delivering itself, right? That's the second dimension, right? Mobility. The third dimension is about technology. It's all about technology and technology, right? None of this would be talked about had it not been for the technology disruption. We're talking of digitization, we're talking of virtualization. We heard examples from the esteemed panel members on, how the meetings are getting, all virtual, how customer visits, can be seamlessly handled through technology interventions, right? We talked about offerings for, scheduling of work, right? That's again technology, right? We also talked about how analytics can help understand people's skills, people talents, and probably look at the best way to utilize the talents, right? We're already seeing traditional work packets getting delivered through robotic automation, RPAs, right? Which means people who actually contributed in those areas probably find themselves in a tough spot. It's nerve-wracking for such employees. We're talking of shop floor, workforce, really thinking about, what's next in for them, right? So all this is getting enabled through technology, right? Now, while all this is happening and the behavioral changes are at ports, at work, the mobility preferences is also happening. I think somewhere down the line, organizations also are looking to change, right? And here again, there's a plethora of organization types, right? We have startups who are probably, digitally native organization. They started digital. Many of the startups are digital first, followers, right? So it's easy for them to not only adopt, but to change the game, as as one of the other panel members was talking about blue ocean strategy, change the game, basically, right? Instead of just trying to beat the competition, change the entire, landscape. But at the other hand, there are a lot of organizations who exist, who are large, who are present across geographies. What about them, right? How do they change? How do they cope up with such drastic, implications for them? So do we move from a classic workforce model where an employee is considered as an asset who has to be, attracted to a particular brand, and from there on, onboarded and then, tried to kind of, wedded to for life, right? We talk about retention statistics. We talk about employee loyalty, right? So do we move from classic workforce model to probably an extended workforce? Answer lies in between. Eventually, we probably will reach to an extended workforce model, but it will be a journey, right? It will not be an overnight switch. So these are the changing dimensions. Now let's look at what are the challenges, right? And what are the imperatives? And what does all of this mean for organizations? I think I'll be short and brief so that we can have some good discussions. But broadly, right, the way I look at it is there'll be three broad heads or categories of changes that we'll have to go through. The first one is the delivery model itself. I think we had one of the questions in the previous panel discussion on how do I know what to engage, right? I mean, how do I know that gig is right for me? How do I know that contingent workforce is probably the way to go? Today's business models, right? And when I say business models, while some of the IT services organizations like like ours in the space is grappling with the idea of workforce management, we also have customers themselves getting disrupted through digital, right? Digital innovation. They are right now facing a whole sort of competition on the digital space. And while we serve such customers who are themselves going through all of this, I think this is the right time to re-engage with our customers and talk about newer, bolder delivery models. For example, I'll probably take a quick example. Our traditional models have been based on the fact that, well, I have a piece of work. Either I completely know about what this work entails, so it means I'll probably go for a fixed price kind of a contract with the end customer. And because I know much about the work, I'll also come up with an operating model where where we try our best to get the best leverage, be it offshore locations, being the right staffing model, right? All of that with an end objective of delivering maybe the most optimized staffing approach, maybe the best pricing value proposition to the customers, right? That's probably been the business model. But what we have to acknowledge is that beneath these models has been our traditional assumptions, traditional points that we considered, or considerations that we had, which are meant for the world of yesterday, right? For example, well, if I staff using an offshore location, location as for the delivery, I'll probably price it low. Why? Because it's it's assumed that my model takes into account that, well, this is your staffing mix, and therefore, if this is your optimal ratios, you got to be cheaper than any other model, right? So some of these models that we had come up with are probably based on yesterday's assumptions, and we need to probably change that, right? So we need to get to a state where we come up and propose solutions where we consider, for example, work from home. Why should it matter, and why should it impact, let's say, the price, depending, if the location is different. It's no different, whether I deliver it from India, North America, Europe, or Australia, right? Doesn't matter. What really matters is what is it that is getting delivered, right? I think so. Value-based pricing propositions would probably be the new normal, and it's going to be a interesting watch as to how organizations adopt, convince not only themselves but the customers to engage in such models. The second interesting change that we talked about is, well, we have already moved into, agile is talked about a lot, right? We have moved into transformation initiatives, which typically, is delivered through agile models. But is the agile model really distributed? That's going to be the next wave, right? Can I co-create with the customer teams? Why should I have it all as an organization? And once we decide to co-create, how the business proposition that I have is tweaked to kind of make sense for me, because eventually we have to create a profitable enterprise. But at the same time, we also need to leverage the workforce that out there that's raring to go and kind of keen to contribute, right, in such a co-creation kind of a model. We also need to really look at the team structures. Now, large organizations are dealing with this more than some of the startups. What's the changing role of the middle management layer, right? So we often dependent upon the hierarchical pyramid structure, where we so often assumed that people who are getting right at the bottom of the pyramid may or may not know what they're delivering, right? And the middle managers would be the folks who would really translate what the people at the bottom of the pyramid would deliver, and then communicate, seek interventions from the people at the top, and then create the reporting structure. And then, of course, enabling groups would come into the fray, using these reports to kind of enable, encourage the people across the pyramid, right? And give them promotions, give them bonuses, give them growth opportunities, different roles, and all of that. Maybe this entire structure, the hierarchical structure itself, needs to be revisited, right? What it means is probably organizations will need to look at defining the work itself. Today, we so often talk about, I have a project requirement, and then the next thing we know is a job description for 10 people. So we talk about the number of people we will need to carry out a certain initiative. Instead, we may in the future, maybe very near future, will need to think of ways to break down the work composition itself, so that it makes easy for the market itself to determine and the talent themselves to get attracted to these work packets and apply for it. As I think in one of the previous panel members was talking about, eventually we probably would be looking at market-based supply versus demand matching scenario, where we will have large platforms, cloud platforms available, where as an individual employee will be able to determine what kind of work employees are would be willing to engage in. Now, if that engagement needs to happen, organizations will need to define what kind of work packets they need help on, right? So this is all about the delivery model. So a lot of changes expected on this front. And of course, is it easy? Absolutely not, because it impacts the entire value chain. It impacts the value chain right from customer engagement. It impacts the pricing propositions. It impacts the HR structures, team structures. It also impacts organization structures, because today, teams take pride in the fact that an employee and an associate belongs to their group, and that group could be a competency development group, it could be a business unit group, so on and so forth, right? Now, the first level of change needs to happen where employees sharing across different functions itself need to be loosened up, right? So it should, we need to create policies and guidelines wherein it becomes easy for employees to move within the organization across functions. So these are some of the imperatives for organizations to change. The second is, of course, employee organization equation, right? Is loyalty to organization a question anymore? Of course, yes. We should continue to value employees who have spent a lot of time and delivered for the organization's success. We should celebrate that success, absolutely, no question about it. But can we have a coexisting environment where co-creation for a common purpose becomes a reality? And that's where that right balance needs to be found. Would it be the same for all the organizations? The answer is again not. It all depends upon what is my current landscape, what kind of initiatives, what are my customer services, what are the services that that we deal in with today, right? And how do we change it, right? And then, of course, elevate the employee engagement to employee experience. What does growth mean for an employee? That needs to be redefined. We need to really take a pause and look at not very far back in time, we defined growth as perhaps people who moved places incrementally from being an individual contributor to start leading teams. And many times, many of the professionals never had that intention of leading teams, but they were probably forced, if I may, right, to get into those roles, because that was probably the only way out for them to grow in an organization. And then, of course, fast forward, we have situations where we talk about, well, how not only people management, just people managers is not the right thing, right, for associates for growth. You need to be tech savvy. You need to be, digitally savvy, right? You need to be digitally, knowledgeable. So what meant growth yesterday may not really mean growth today. So employee engagement and employee experience also will have to undergo changes, right? And then, of course, a lot has been invested on learning, right? From classroom training to virtual online trainings, and then, of course, self-directed learning. And of course, this is going to further refine itself, where learning is most likely going to become tailor-made with capsules, right? Specific activities requiring specific output, capsules being designed for them, right? Where employees can themselves, the onus will be on employees, right? The the responsibility for the organization, the WFM, the HR teams will be to enable that, right? Through systems, through the platforms, and definition of what kind of learning is needed for them that will make relevant, right? I think that is what is very, very critical for organizations to do. Sharing with the employees on what works for them, what will help them, right? And of course, the enabling ecosystem, right? This is where I think a lot of technology companies, startups are really making a great effort. It could be schedule planning, right? It could be skill search. It could be supply versus demand aggregated algorithms. It could also be looking at the preference of the employees, right? All of that, right? How do we have customized onboarding processes, right? So often than not, right, we talk about all these futuristic things, but when it comes to getting simple interviews done, we get stuck in a debate as to how a specific role today, right, requires 4 levels of interviews, right? 2 internal, 1 customer, and then of course another level, right? Can we change that? That's the challenge organizations are going through. Because eventually, if we have to change that, we have to relook at the business model. If we have to change that, we also have to look at the employee organization equation, right? So it's all interconnected. And that's the dilemma that organizations are going through, right? How do we change some of the stuff? Can we offer employee capabilities as be very transparent with the customer, right? Sign up for output-based contracts, and from an employee standpoint, go all over the place, right? In terms of mixing and matching various talent acquisition strategies to staff, right for the initiatives, right? And of course, the employee journey itself, right through the process. HR interventions are going to change big time, right? To really make sure that employee experience is completely changed and employees want to work, with the organization. That will be the future. Today we are fighting a battle to hire an employee. Tomorrow we'll be marketing the kind of work we have to really hire a portion of the time of the future prospective employees. I think that is how the scene is emerging. I think that's all I had in terms of my thoughts. I'll just leave all of you with this particular thought. The change has begun, right? And it's not just about what we do to adopt and adapt and take new talent acquisition models to execution, right? It also will mean that for large organizations, we handhold our existing workforce and we help them in transforming themselves. Because remember, while all of this is going on, a lot of the existing workforce may find it tough to cope up with the change, right? Of course, few of them will be left out. They will have to figure out how they really cope up with the change. But it's the organization's responsibility as well to enable the current workforce and help them transform. I think that will be the challenge and the new dilemma for all of us. I think with that, Shiva, I open up for questions. I hope I was audible, and I hope I was not too fast. Thank you.
Yes, Vasudev. Thank you so much for very, very comprehensive and insightful view on workforce management and the arena. I open the questions to all the audience. If you're free to ask any questions, you can raise your hand here so that I can unmute you. We have a question again from Prachi. Good,
Hi,
Prachi.
Vasu. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for, walking us through, this new idea altogether about an extended, workforce model that eventually, we are all onto a journey, and we'll see how it will pan out to be. So my question here is, can you give us some insight of when you use this term extended workforce model? What would be some components of it, because since this is still an ambiguity, we are not into it, we are still treading into it as a journey. What would it be looking like, and we as WFM professionals, what do we need to scale on to eventually be adaptive to that kind of a model?
So yeah, thanks, Prachi, for the question and your interest. I think when I said extended workforce today, when we look at a business proposition for, let's say, an initiative, right? We look at the number of people we require, right? We there's a detailed planning that the teams do. We also look at some of the skills that we require in order to accomplish the role, accomplish the work. But the way we look at it today is probably in a two-dimensional approach, right? First, we look at, well, does this need only internal employees, right, to accomplish the role? Number one. Number two, does it also perhaps require, maybe some specialist for the niche skills, right? And that is what we today call as subcontractor workforce. And how do we accomplish that? We reach out to the vendors who are empaneled in the organization, and we seek their help and partnership to get us the right talent in those specific areas where organizations feel they don't have in-house talent. And of course, there's a third arm where every organizations invest on, where they look at hiring, fresh talent, many out of colleges. And then, of course, as even in the previous, one of the keynote speeches, we heard that there's an elaborate training program that these graduates go through. So it's always a dilemma about these three or four components, right? When we define the staffing solution. When we say extended workforce, all of the three options that I just talked about, it's all inward looking. It's all about, well, do I have the talent in-house? Full-time employees. Do I have the ability to nurture maybe the future talent by giving them the opportunity for the work today? That's also inward, right? Because we've already hired these graduates. But extended would mean, how about going out in the market, right? And market these small pieces of work. So first of all, break down the work components into, meaningful, maybe user stories for better, for lack of a better word, right? In an agile term. Create these user stories, right? And go out there in the market to attract talent who would be interested in contributing to these, to completion of these user stories. So now what happens, you're basically changing the game. Instead of trying to figure out how I meet and how I staff to complete this particular piece of work, you are suddenly opening up the canvas where we say that it doesn't matter where the talent is. This is what I need to accomplish, right? And it's a micro or a mini capsule. It's not a huge project, right? So the job description would not look like, well, inviting applications for a transformational initiative, legacy modernization initiative. No, it wouldn't look like that. It would probably look like a specific micro level description of what we need, right? And eventually there will be platforms in the future, the GitHubs of the world, where developers will be more than happy to contribute. And we would have platforms emerge where organizations would be able to market these, and the talent would find these work opportunities and go for it, right? Which means the entire way we create the business model would need to look at, how do I leverage this? To what level I leverage these channels? And how do I utilize all of this finally price it and provide, value to my customer. Extended workforce will also mean, right, on a different note, can I co-create with the customer? For example, Industry 4.0 is there. We're talking of driverless cars. We're talking of scenarios where the customer themselves are experimenting, right? Can I join hands with the customer and co-create a solution? That is already begun, right? And can I do more of it? I think that would be the kind of models that we will have to experiment with. Hopefully, I answered your question, Pat.
Yes, it does. But just to add my 2 cents on the first part of what you said about, going ahead and leveraging out the bits and pieces of the job description to see what's available in the market. I just wanted to understand the current workforce model. Maybe I'll be very specific to what I am following is we'll have to first analyze, you rightly said, what we're going to make versus what we're going to buy. So now you're saying that this extended would most probably be everything being outsourced in bits and pieces and leveraged kind of a thing, and not specifically, looking what's there internally first and trying to leverage our internal workforce. Is that the right understanding?
No, it would not be entirely. A lot of it would be a mix and match, right? For example, if you break down even for agiles, right? I mean, I'll give an example, right? Of, let's say, project management, right? We talked about traditional project management. Now we talk about product owners. We talk about Scrum masters, right? Now there has been a transformation of the in-house talent, right? People who are traditional project managers in large organizations are looking to transform themselves into product owners, agile, project managers, and so on and so forth, right? Now, the dilemma for teams like workforce groups would be to look at ways of leveraging the in-house talent, and a lot of it would require transforming them. For example, manual testing. A lot of organizations have so many manual testers today, right? But how many new opportunities do we get where we really need manual testers, onesies and twosies? Even if you call them as testing jobs, it involves a lot of automation. So we will have to mix and match where we say that this is my current workforce. And again, as you rightly pointed out, it will be different for different organizations, because it also depends upon what kind of talent do we have today, right, within the organization. So we'll have to look at the current workforce. We'll have to break it down into potential future skills for the current workforce. And for those skills, we leverage in-house talent. And for the rest of it, we will have to do a mix and match, right? And that's the scope for these extended workforce kind of model, where probably today we leverage full-time subcontractors, right? Maybe that would be the starting point for leveraging some of these the gig economy workers in the future. Does that clarify?
Yes, absolutely, Vasu. That was very insightful. Thank you. And I think just one more sentence to what I'll add is the second part that you said to co-create a solution with the customer. I think when we are going to go ahead and follow this kind of an approach, wherein we go ahead and institutionalize what's there in-house and what we are going to go ahead and focus on the gig workers. That is how we are going to go ahead and propose this as a solution to our customers, that along with this we'll be doing this. What if this does not work and this work? Is that a correct thought as well?
Co-creation will be a business model, right? So we got to co-create. We got to probably lead the customer in many cases, and perhaps co-create in many other situations. That's the need of the hour. Now, in order to do that, do we have the skills in-house? Maybe not, maybe yes, right? Maybe some of it, yes. But if we don't have the skills, for us to be leading in the digital age, we'll have to do two-pronged things, right? Number one, look at which parts of these skills we can really target to transform the current workforce. That's one. And second, which of these is something that I'll have to buy from the market. So which means that goes back and ties back to the whole workforce planning and scheduling part of it, right? I proactively target our areas of strength as an organization and proactively look at getting the talent on board. A lot of it could also come from the gig economy, workers. That's how I see it.
Yep, absolutely. That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prachi. Thank you.
Thanks, Prachi.
Any other questions?
I think we have one more person here today. We have Lalit. Do you have a question? I've already unmuted you. You can ask question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I just unmuted it by mistake. Actually, I really don't have any question, Vasu.
Okay, wonderful.
Sure, Lalit.
Great. Thank you so much, Vasu, for your insightful session on the WFM trends and organizational changes. Truly immense support in terms of sharing the knowledge and great thought process. With this, thank you so much for having you, and thank you so much for taking your time. Looking forward to having you in the upcoming session at panel discussion 3.